feel like none of this video is going to make sense, but I'm already too far into filming it to stop.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to respond to a Roaming Millennial's video called, Why the Left Hates Jordan Peterson, since I do consider she doesn't understand the left. She seems to think it's some sort of monolithic concept where every individual thinks the same way, such a strange view on the left, considering how she's against collectivism. But anyway, before we start, full disclaimer, I don't consider the left to be a monolithic concept, and, while I reckon not all leftists think or feel the same way about Jordan Peterson, I would like to talk about the reasons why in general Roaming Millenial is wrong about most of her points regarding the reason why the left hates Jordan Peterson, because so far I've never seen any leftist of any lineage hating Peterson for anything she says we do. Now that I think about it, I've never actually seen anyone hating Jordan Peterson. I've seen a lot of leftists disagreeing with him and presenting arguments against his ideas. I don't know if that qualifies as hatred in Roaming Millennial's book, but it certainly doesn't in mine. So, anyway, I've never seen anyone on the left disliking Jordan Peterson for any reason she gives, except one, but we'll get to it. Before we start, I fail to see why didn't she simply ask someone on the left to give her their opinions about Jordan Peterson. If she really wanted to know, I think she could have done a much better job researching the left. She could have tried to understand what that totally monolithic concept known as the left actually believes instead of just assuming it based on her feelings and opinions about it, because, at one point she claims that, in order to understand why the far left hates Jordan Peterson so much, you first have to understand what the far left believes, which is something I agree on, but she doesn't ever in her video defines what is the far left and what does it believe, so pretty bad start right here. As far as I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the far left actually hates identity politics, liberal progressivism and even postmodernism, despite what people like Roaming Millennial may believe. The reasons she pointed out are not the ones why the so-called far left dislikes Peterson. Actually, I repeat, I've never seen any leftist complaining about anything she says on her video, except probably reason number 3. The left really dislikes that one about him, because he doesn't understand what he's talking about. But anyway, I think the main reason why Roaming Millennial got it all wrong is because she doesn't really understand the left at all. I don't know if at some point she got named the official understander and spokeswoman of the left, but I don't think that ever happened, therefore I strongly believe she shouldn't act as if she were in such position. I personally would much rather have a leftist talking for the left. But, anyway, let's see what she has to say.
Number 1, his take on masculinity.
I like the masculine spirit. It's necessary. And it's not fundamentally carnage and pillaging. It's not fundamentally rape culture. It's not fundamentally world destroying. And all of those things all of those aspersions have been cast upon it. That's partly the guilt of Western society.
What is a masculinity we can aspire to?
Well, it's responsibility fundamentally. To put it symbolically is that your responsibility is to incarnate the spirit of the Logos. That's your responsibility. That's your role in life.
Progressivism, third wave feminism, social justice, they're not exactly fans of masculinity. Terms like male privilege, mansplaining, toxic masculinity, and patriarchy all speak to the fact that in the eyes of the progressive, men are not a positive force on this planet, but rather an oppressive one. And that's not to say that progressives think every single man out there is evil, because, some of those men have vaginas. It's just that masculinity is inherently violent and aggressive and must therefore be reined in lest it corrupt our society.
Roaming Millennial's misunderstanding of the terms male privilege, toxic masculinity, and patriarchy are flawed, which leads her to think that they all mean basically, men have to be put to death immediately, which is not true. But this wouldn't have happened if she had spent a few minutes of her life Googling what those terms actually mean. For someone who claims to understand the left, she seems to be rather uninformed about it. Patriarchy, toxic masculinity, etc. are not concepts against men, but rather terms to talk about how certain attitudes promoted societally in men can be harmful to society and to men themselves, such as not expressing their feelings, believing they are entitled to have sex, and so on. Things do indeed hurt society and men themselves. An extreme case of these beliefs causing irreversible damage came about with Elliot Rogers, who went on a mass killing because he felt diminished because he couldn't get laid, which frustrated him. So unless you think such views are masculine, and all men have it, then you'd have to agree that the left doesn't hate men, it just criticizes certain harmful attitudes that some men have, due to certain societal conditions. In my view, the left actually cares for men, and it doesn't want them to keep doing this harmful activities. The left doesn't think masculinity is inherently violent, that'd be an essentialist view on gender, which is something leftists don't believe in. Leftists in general tend to oppose to gender essentialism, since we believe gender is mostly a social construct. I'd like you to remember this point, because later, Roaming Millennial contradicts herself, stating that we, leftists, believe gender is not a biological and alterable feature, while here on this part she claimed literally that we believe that, and I quote, "Progressives don't believe all men are evil because some of those men have vaginas, it's just that masculinity is inherently violent and aggressive." End of quote. So if not all men are evil because some of them have vaginas, then we must believe that having a vagina is the only way a man cannot be evil, because, well, she said that having a vagina is the reason why not all of them are evil in our view according to her. So the only way this can be true would be if there was something inherently evil in not having a vagina, which is a birth biological feature of sexually female individuals, which must mean that, according to her, we believe in gender essentialism. So keep this on mind, it'll be useful later.
His view on self-improvement.
What could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to. And maybe so others don't have to either. It's something like that. You know, like there's a real injunction at the bottom of it. It's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. Now, and you could say, well, I don't care about that, but that's actually not true. You actually do care about that, because if you're in pain, you will care about it.
If you're at all familiar with neo-Marxism, or I guess traditional Marxism, you'll recognize the theme of oppressor versus oppressed. Whether it's race, class, gender, or culture, according to the Marxist perspective, problems exist because they are thrust upon people by their oppressors. Problems in the black community, it's the whites' fault. Women not earning enough, let's blame the men. From the Marxist point of view, it's not about what you can do better, but rather what someone else has done to hinder you. Problems in your life, well, it's not about you, comrade, it must just be someone else holding you down, probably the man. If you're from an ideology that despises the concept of self-ownership and responsibility, that's terrifying.
I don't think any leftist would have a disagreement with Peterson's self-improvement. I can't imagine why would we, but I do, however, have a lot of disagreements with the totally unrelated comment Roaming Millennial made about Marxism after the clip by Peterson she showed. That's a quite popular talking point Jordan Peterson constantly repeats, even if Roaming Millennial didn't show him saying that. I'm sure you'll know she took it from Peterson, and that one is something I've actually seen a lot of leftists disagreeing with Peterson about. I wonder why she didn't show Peterson saying that and claiming we hated him because of that particular display of bullshit. She would have gotten it right, but anyway, let's analyze it. I am in fact quite familiar with Marxism and neo-Marxism, the later of which is not, by the way, what Peterson or Roaming Millennial think it is. By the way, let me quote Dawes Capital, here it goes. "And I will feed them that oppress thee with their own flesh, and they shall be drunken with their own blood, as with sweet wine, and all flesh shall know that I the Lord am thy Savior and thy Redeemer." Here's another quote by Marx himself. "So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. Oh, wait. Those are actually quotes from the Bible, obviously, because that idea of oppressed versus oppressor has been present for a really long time and has been used a lot by a lot of different thinkers. Jordan Peterson and by extension Roaming Millenial seem to misunderstand Marxism, because the narrative of oppressed versus oppressor doesn't come from Marx. He wasn't the only one or even the first one to talk about this. In a nutshell, Marxists believe that material conditions cause the unequal distribution of wealth among societies, which causes the capitalist class to withhold a lot of power, and therefore it's allowed to control the lower social class, the working class. It doesn't take a genius to see why it's literally impossible to extrapolate that to race, gender, sex, or any of those things that Jordan Peterson thinks are somehow Marxist. Marxism believes in a progression of history by dialectic materialism. They believe that economics are the motor of history, and their goal is to get rid of the market and establish a workers' state. Words have a meaning, and I think it's important to respect it, especially with words as precise and nuanced as Marxism. Reducing it to oppression is childish. Also, the narrative of oppressed versus oppressor isn't even originated in Marxism. It can be traced back even to Plato, who identified democratically elected leaders as oppressors who had to actively fight back against their oppressed peoples to keep them in line. It was also used by Aristotle, and I quote, "The male is by nature superior, and the female inferior, and the one rules and the other is ruled. This principle, of necessity, extends to all mankind." Albeit both these Greek philosophers believed that hierarchies were a positive feature, to be honest, but they did believe in the narrative of oppressor versus oppressed. Rousseau and Voltaire also believed in this narrative, in an echo of Locke and an anticipation of Marx. Rousseau argues that a state would, in effect, be a class state, guided by the common interest of the rich and propertied and imposing unfreedom and subordination on the poor and weak. Then there's Hegel, and his version of this narrative is the one Marxism took. We also have John Stuart Mill and John Rawls. These two guys are actually the ones you can link with the current SJW oppression narrative, not Marx. And even libertarians such as Robert Nozick or Murray Rothbard, who see the state as the oppressor. And lastly, fascists such as Gentile or Mussolini, who see this narrative in terms of race, and whose take on the subject comes from Hegel as well. So as you may see, if your definition of Marxism is oppressed versus oppressor, then you can make literally any political ideology a Marxist one. I'd argue that even Peterson somehow is a postmodern neo-Marxist, as he believes the postmodern academics oppress everyone who disagrees with them. But that's nonsense. Also, some far-left hardcore Marxists oppose identity politics on the same grounds people like Peterson do. And Marxism doesn't despise self-ownership, it actually embraces it, since they seek to liberate the individual from the alienation of capitalism and their dependence to the capitalist. But anyway, if Roaming Millennial thinks Marx can be reduced to basically oppression, then I think it's pointless to hope she knows this.
And number 3, the left hates Jordan Peterson because of his position on gender.
Finally, we arrived at the only one point Roaming Millennial got right. I've seen a lot of leftists disagreeing with Peterson about his misrepresentation of what gender is. This is a true reason why many leftists particularly dislike him.
It's so primitive. These conceptions, this idea that identity is your choice. Identity is negotiated with other people, which even the bloody social constructionists admit. The idea that it's a whim, that it's something you choose on the basis of your personal, of a personal feeling, is that level of understanding is approximately the developmental level of a 2-year-old. And I mean that technically.
Pretty much everything he said on that clip is wrong. And leftists don't believe that. He's not saying something the left believes. The idea that identity is your choice is a misrepresentation. I've never found any single ideology that supports that idea. This really strikes me, since only a few moments later he claims that, and I quote, "Identity is negotiated with other people, which even a bloody social constructionist admits, which is true. That's the real opinion the left generally has about gender. Peterson doesn't elaborate on this, but I'd like to point out that he's creating a straw man of the left. Even the most radical proponents of gender as a social construct, such as Judith Butler, have never claimed that gender is something you choose, as Peterson said. But anyway, luckily our spokeswoman for the radical far left will elaborate deeper on this.
If you're a progressive, then there is a good chance that you don't see gender as simply a set of characteristics based on both biology and culture used to differentiate men and women. Instead, gender is this magical, amorphous thing based on feelings and personality and fashion.
But I thought we progressives saw gender under a gender essentialist lens, as according to Roaming Millenial, we believe men are inherently evil and not having a vagina makes people not evil somehow. It seems to me that this person doesn't understand the left. I wonder why she decided it'd be a good idea to present herself as an understander of it.
In contrast to this, Dr. Peterson looks at things like biology and, just the history of Western civilization and in fact 99.9% of other civilizations and says no. The third reason we're going to talk about is religion, or theology. Belief in God, whatever you want to call it.
I thought it would be nice if we started with something quick and easy and simple, like God.
Well, it's a complicated problem, and I don't think that we take it with due seriousness. I specifically don't think that the celebrity atheist types, who I actually have a fair bit of respect for, by the way, take it with due seriousness. So I don't think that they take it with due seriousness from a biological perspective or a phenomenological perspective or a literary perspective or a metaphoric perspective. That'll do for starters.
I was going to say that this is probably going to be the most controversial segment of the video, but then I realized all the other segments are also controversial, so it's just everybody mad about everything all the time. But anyway, another hallmark of progressivism is hostility toward religion, specifically Judeo-Christian practices. In general, the progressive mindset looks at devout Christians and practicing Jews and sees them as superstitious, old-fashioned, brainwashed. And by the way, even though Islam is another Abrahamic faith and perhaps the least progressive of all of them, for some reason it's largely exempt from this sort of criticism. I don't know why.
Actually, the left is quite tolerant with religious beliefs. If he believes in God, so be it. We don't care at all. As I've said before, I've never seen anyone on the left hating Peterson because he believes in God. As far as I know, the skeptic, anti-feminist anti-SJW movement came from atheists, but the left doesn't say atheists are right-wingers, because we don't see the right as a monolithic concept. If Roaming Millenial was willing to read a little about Islam criticism from the left, perhaps she would know that Islam is not exempt from it. But I do want to congratulate her on getting another thing right. Let's listen to it again.
I don't know.
Exactly. She doesn't know. She just doesn't know. Anyway, let's continue.
After all, like Marx said, religion is the opiate of the masses, and that doesn't sound like a good thing. Saying something is the opiate of something is not a positive.
But I'm glad she did. Once again, she didn't understand Marx. That quote about the opium of the people is not a critic towards religion, but an observation of its structural functionalism within societies, which, to be honest, depending on how you look at it, it can be a pretty good thing. There are leftists who see it that way. Walter Rauschenbusch or Martin Luther King were religious, far-left leaders, so if Marx saying something she didn't understand about religion proves leftists are anti-religious, then the existence of those two should also prove the opposite.
If you ask Dr. Peterson, though, things are a little more complicated than that. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to summarize Peterson's personal beliefs toward God, because frankly, I can't.
Kudos to you for admitting you don't understand Peterson religion. Perhaps you should do that also with Marx, and the left in general, because you can't summarize them either, at all.
Alright, and number 5, the fifth reason why the left hates Jordan Peterson is that he's an academic.
It's not a matter of concern for us that he's an academic. He's a doctor in psychology. He obviously knows a lot about it, and that's cool. What bothers us is that he tends to talk about things he just doesn't understand. Actually, if he only spoke about psychology, I don't think anyone would oppose him. But he speaks about Marx or postmodernism as if he had read about them, when he obviously hasn't. That's what concerns us. Now that I think about it, I just can't grasp the idea that whenever I see the name Jordan Peterson, it's always something about topics totally unrelated to his area of expertise that are just beyond him. It's like if a physicist talked about philosophy or a sociologist about mathematics.
The fact that he is so successful.
No, we don't care about his success, we care about the fact that he's pretty bad at understanding things, in general, but so good at making it seem like he understands them when talking to ignorant people who look for something to confirm their biases. That is definitely a risk. But not because he's successful, but because he uses his success to talk about things he doesn't get. Then people who listen to him are like, oh, Marx, that guy who invented oppression, yeah, I totally know him. 5 quadrillion people died because of him, and they will most likely never read him, while believing they don't need to, which sucks. If he were successful but not misleading, we wouldn't mind.